Stand by. Live on YouTube. Check, check, check. Gonna start recording in 5, 4, 3. What's up, beautiful people, and welcome to episode 10 of the Rolling in the Deep podcast. Today, I've got a special guest, somebody that I respect, somebody who has been a major influence in my life, whether she knows it or not, and somebody that's a close friend. I consider her to be a sister from another mister. That's Miss Tara Blumenthal, and I'm going to read a quick bio, and then we're going to jump into it. So Tara is the owner of Tara Yoga Movement and Wellness Clinic and the drummer for Mellow Kiss Royals. She and her husband make up the rhythm section, playfully awarding herself the Lifetime Griever Achievement Award, which we'll get into. One of her superpowers is speaking candidly about her extensive grief timeline, noting that it rolls out longer than a kid's Christmas wish list. I can't imagine any kids that would want that kind of wish list. Tara has been a yoga and movement educator for over 20 years. She loves connecting through music and freely shares that playing the drums is an essential part of her therapy and self-care. Of her successful 20-year teaching career, she insists it's all about experience. Knowledge is necessary, but application is the key. One of her central teachings is right time plus right place equals right action. This holds true in life or death or grief, yoga, as well as playing the drums. She loves her family, the Foo Fighters, cats, and hula hooping in no particular order. Her accomplishments, which I think that she absolutely shortchanged herself here because I know she's done a lot of things and changed a lot of lives. Tara Yoga Movement and Wellness Clinic survived a major pandemic. She has a new book coming out this year on her 40-plus years of grieving. Tara's band, Mellow Kiss Royals, has a new album coming out this year. Her podcast, Unfiltered Tea, peels back the layers on everyday life and offers an authentic conversation for self-contemplation. It's been both a brutal and creative past few years. On goals, I love this. I don't set goals, never have. This traces back to childhood grief, but even without the goals, I'm doing just fine. And I'm going to just give her a quick plug, and I'll plug this even more so at the end. How can you find Tara? She's got on Instagram at Not Your Over Average Yoga Teacher. Let me say that again, at Not Your Average Yoga Teacher. And then on Instagram for her band, at Mellow Kiss Royals. And then her podcast is Unfiltered Tea, just with the letter T, and that's on Spotify. And then the website is www.tarayogamovementandwellnessclinic.com. And again, I'll give you all of these in the show notes once this wraps up. But welcome, Tara. It is awesome to have you on the show, and it's awesome to see you in person. It has been too doggone long.
I know, right? And what a sweet intro. My bio is a little funny. I forgot when I wrote that. Whatever. But your introduction was so sweet. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And it's
very moving.
And it's the truth. It's the truth. Tara and I have been friends for years.
Yeah.
We've known each other we used to do.
Neither one of us had gray hair back then.
That's right. I've got plenty of gray hair today.
Right.
And that's the results of life, and that's a result of having a child as well.
Right.
But we've crossed paths, and it's been an awesome friendship over these years, and I'm really excited to dive into the conversation and get to know a little bit more about you, what makes you tick, and get a little bit to know more about what brought you on this path. And so that's kind of where I want to start out the conversation. Is give me a little bit about your background.
Okay.
How you ended up as a yoga teacher, because I think a lot of people think that people that gravitate towards yoga are they've got this background where that's just the path that they felt called to be on. And I don't feel like that may resonate with you or may not be part of your story. So share a little bit about your background.
I've shared this before, but I don't think in such a platform that is this far reaching, is that I didn't know what yoga was when I was a little girl. So people have aspirations, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer. And I was like, well, this also traces back to childhood grief, but I think for me, and I didn't tell anybody this, I never admitted this to anybody, and I finally, through doing some grief work, put it in my book that my goal, like when I was growing up, I was like, I just want to be reunited with my mom because she died when I was so young. So all these aspirations of being someone very important or an influencer, none of that was attractive to me. I wanted to get by. Do you know what I mean? Right. And kids don't have a great concept of time. And so I don't know. I wasn't really attracted to yoga. Everything kind of comes on the scene late in Mississippi, as you well know, whether it's a fitness or wellness trend or whatever. And so, I'd heard a lot about it, and I'd had some really unfortunate experiences at the gym. Nobody's fault, right? Not the most coordinated gal in the universe. And so I was like, well, maybe I can do yoga since I can't. I didn't feel very accomplished at the gym. So I tried yoga. Didn't feel very accomplished with that either. I was like looking around the room at people 20 years older than me, and I was like, how can they do that and me not? Not that I was special, but I was like, I kind of expected my physical body to be able to do certain things. And so I started realizing I don't move normally. And I also started realizing, like, I wonder if any of this is genetic, which was interesting because it also brought me back to the place of what I got from my mother and what I got from my father. And although I couldn't ask them things, I did have enough memories of them and their physical appearance and the way that they moved or the way that they walked to kind of be able to start to connect the dots. And so when I started practicing yoga, I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea that it would be a physically empowering journey, but also a healing journey for me. But it wasn't like yoga itself didn't do that. It was me showing up for yoga and committing to something and then doing the work on the side, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah.
so when you say you feel like you didn't move well in your body, or you felt like you felt maybe inadequate, or felt like that you were moving incorrectly,
Mm-hmm.
that requires some awareness first and foremost.
Yeah.
What led to that? What made you feel that maybe you weren't moving correctly? Was there pain associated with it, or was it just something you just felt like you were looking at other people and like, hey,
Oh,
they're doing
excellent.
that, and I can't do that?
Yeah, there was a little bit of that. Like everybody's taken a general shape. And of course, this is definitely a rookie brain, right? Because I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. But when I tell people this, I know a lot of people don't believe me. I have a friend that can verify how ridiculously tight my hamstrings were. So, you bend over to pick up something off the floor, and there's a lot of like forward bending in yoga. We've changed that. I've changed the way that I teach that now based on hips and lumbar spine. We can talk about that later if you want. But it was like a screeching car when I started to bend over. My hamstrings were like, nope, and I could just, I was like, can I get some WD-40 for my, and maybe that'll work. And so I definitely noticed the discrepancy of movement for me with the rest of the class, but there were other people that struggled too. And it wasn't so much that I felt like I wasn't good enough, but I wanted to understand the why, which actually took me more into anatomy than I was ever interested in when I was younger, right? It's like science, biology, whatever. And then all of a sudden I fell in love with anatomy and movement. And so it's been an interesting journey, definitely not expecting to want to teach. But I love the way that the practice felt for me, that I thought if I can do it, right, in my weird body and my weak body, then anybody can do it. And it did help with back pain. I will say that. Like I had some significant back pain in my early 20s. And when I started practicing, eventually I was like, my back pain is gone. So that was a bonus. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as far as a calling goes, I gave myself permission in the pandemic to let go of yoga completely. Like I was like, I have no idea what's going to happen. And I know that sometimes when we're in a desperate space as humans, we try to micromanage the situation to keep something going that shouldn't be. And I didn't tell my students this because I'm sure it would have freaked everybody out, but I was like, I let go. I literally took my hands off the steering wheel and I was like, if this isn't the right thing for me to do anymore, I want to be open to what's next. Not that I didn't love teaching. I wanted to be honest with myself about what was going to happen on the other side of things. And it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And it was powerful because on the flip side of that, turns out I am still supposed to be doing this. Yeah. And it does to me now probably more than ever feel like a calling because as you probably know, there's so much bad information out there, harmful. Like I'll have teacher friends call me from like across the way and they were like, you got to watch this video. And I'm like, I can't watch, because it's another instructor telling on Facebook Live, this is how you do this pose, or this is how you get more flexible. And I'm like, you're going to rip tendons. You can't fix that. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a place where I kind of have to catch my breath. And there are times when I want to just leave the discipline because it's so gross to me. But then I'm like, well, if I leave, then there's nobody educating,
Yeah.
So I stay.
That was going to be my question. I mean, obviously, we'll get into what your journey looked like from somebody who became a yoga practitioner, somebody who gravitated towards yoga for whatever your reasons were, to becoming a yoga teacher, to becoming a business owner. Because those are, people think that like, oh yeah, it's just this smooth transition, real easy, and all you do is just practice yoga all day and you just meditate.
Oh, I know, right?
Life is just all sunshine, rainbows, and lollipops, and that is not the case. I know that to be not to be the case, but I wanted to ask you. So you said that you were considering just letting go of yoga, which that is for people who don't understand it. I do understand it because coaching was something that was near and dear to my heart, something that I identified with, and it's because of the fact that I learned a lot of lessons through it. And it's something that I felt like was a gift that I could give back to others. And it's something that I saw people doing, in my eyes, I mean, this is my opinion, incorrectly. Right. They were not doing it the right way, and they were putting people in harm's way. And so I wanted to do it what I consider to be the right way. Yeah. Part of the struggle was, once you're identified with something and so deeply ingrained in you, it becomes a part of you. And all of a sudden now you're saying, I'm gonna be willing to let this thing go and allow God, the universe, higher power to show me what direction to go into. Yeah. So the fact that you did that is crazy.
Scary as hell, like no lie. And I don't think people understand. It wasn't me, or I want to clarify, it wasn't me saying I'm not going to practice yoga anymore or use the tenets of the philosophy that I've adopted to kind of like navigate life. That was going to always be a part of me. But I literally considered stepping away from teaching because I was like, if this isn't the right thing, because a lot of things are going live. Let's do. I can do yoga from this person in Germany live, and why should I be in the studio? And what I discovered when we did Zoom, which was the safest way for a while there for us to practice together, and I had the big screen. I was watching students, but not being in the actual space where people are moving around, whether it's yoga or whatever. You can't see a lot. And when people came back, when we were able to be back in person, I had to reteach so much that was basic because I was like, oh, y'all picked up some bad habits. And it's legit. Like, if you're not pre-programmed to constantly, you know what I'm going to say, check yourself before you wreck yourself.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
If you're not pre-programmed to do that, and most students aren't because they're so used to just enjoying good verbal cues from great coaches and teachers, that they kind of get in like checkout mode or autopilot. And so I was like, oh, wow. And these were great students. There's nothing like disqualifying about them. But I was like, I have to start over and reteach. And then you know what else you may find interesting, and I found interesting, was our bodies changed during the pandemic. Yeah. And so we needed to figure out better ways to move, different verbal cues. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So it was a learning experience for me, but in a good way. I was like, oh, let's go back to the drawing board again. Right.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point there, because I think that people think that you're somebody that's been on a journey for an extended period of time, that you become this guru or you become this person who's a master. And to me, I think that, not to say there aren't masters out there, there absolutely are, but I think that there's a certain humility that you have to recognize, hey, I got to be coachable, I got to be teachable. And I think that regardless of how far down the path that you've gone, having a coach or a teacher who can see things from an objective point of view versus however you're perceiving them to be is such a game changer. And to your point, I mean, you get into these bad habits or these bad patterns and don't even realize it and don't recognize it. And somebody who's a really good teacher can call that to your attention. Yeah. That's the reason why I think that everybody should have a teacher or a coach, whatever it is. It can be mental health, it could be yoga, it could be weightlifting, whatever it is.
Therapy.
Yeah.
Love me some therapy.
All of these things, because we're not made to do things in a vacuum and just do things on our own.
Right.
And I think we've gotten to this place now where we've become so individualized that we silo ourselves and we think that I'm supposed to be the person that knows all this stuff and I don't need to listen to anybody else.
Right. Yeah.
So how do you, my question, I guess I said a lot there, but my question to you is, How do you navigate that? Do you ever find yourself becoming fatigued or maybe fed up with people that are just like, you know what, I'm just going to go take a yoga class with Joe Blow up the street because they got, their certification online?
Oh yeah. The frustration is more because I've been doing this long enough. Clears throat, 20 years. I've been doing this long enough to see people come to me after having bad experiences and having to have a hip replacement.
Mm-hmm.
I know what bad repetitive movement does. And so it's not about somebody going to another teacher. I wish there were more good teachers out there. I would hire them. Mm. But at this point in my career, because we've become so specialized, it's almost like I have to train people from the get-go. Because then when I get somebody that's done a training from someone else, I have to untrain things. I'm like, well, that's not true. That's actually not what the pose is supposed to do anyway. And what they're not teaching, I don't even know if I'm answering your question. I think I scrolled myself.
Yeah,
but what I think they're not teaching is, because now you've got rookie teachers doing teacher trainings. Mm-hmm. And they're teaching, and so it's like the blind leading the blind.
Right.
We're not teaching that there's more than one way to optimally do a pose. Mm-hmm. And we're also, or at least, globally, not asking the question of, like, what does this pose actually do, and is it necessary? Because, like, for me, like, I rewrote a syllabus. Like, there's a yoga syllabus that exists out there that was started with classical yoga, and, it's, I'm going to go ahead and say it's just stupid. Mm. And I'm like, oh, well, if this pose doesn't serve a function for the body, and the risk is greater than the reward, delete, trash bin. Like, I don't have time for that shit, And so I'll have people come to me and they'll want something. And I've actually gotten to a point in my career where I'm honest. I'm like, I'm not going to give you that. And I don't think we're going to be the right fit for you, which is crazy because I'm still recovering from the financial blows, the pandemic. So you would think I'd just take anybody. Yeah. It's not how I operate. Yeah. And also when someone like that comes into our group, because it is now a small group, it throws the energy off. It throws it changes, because our folks are not about competition. They're not about, like, check out this cool pose, like, watch me put my foot behind my leg, all that stuff. We're not about that, and I tell people, like, advanced yoga is being nice to your family. Mm-hmm. It's not a pose. Right. Advanced yoga is like practicing loving kindness with the people that see you at your worst point. Yeah. That's exactly it. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what is your philosophy at Tara Yoga? I mean, because obviously.
How much time do you have?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we kind of like.
I'm going to need part two.
Maybe we talk about, okay, what you've seen and how you've changed.
Yeah.
How has that changed for you?
Yeah. So I want to give a little history of yoga without going down like the rabbit hole, but any pose in any philosophy started with classical yoga, and it was brought to the United States in the classical form. And the classical mentality is basically like, if you want to find happiness, but they don't really focus on happiness, it's more the word enlightenment, then you have to overcome your body and your mind to get to that place, which is subjugation. There's no joy, and it's rigid. The mentality of, this is the one right way to do the pose, and you have to keep working until you get to that one right way. Who cares if your joints in your body actually don't move that way? Keep trying, And so one of the teachers that I studied with early on was in a different kind of philosophy discipline where, yes, we want to change our bodies. Yes, we want to get stronger. And we want to, there was a little bit of association with the stronger that we make our physical body, it's a discipline to withstand some of the pressures of life. Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with that. But the philosophy of that was, we're given this body. This is our vehicle. And can't trade this model in. Mm-hmm. That was kind of my add-on. Like, you may get a new knee, right? New brakes on your car, but like where you can trade your car in, you can't trade your body model in. You're stuck with it. Mm-hmm. And so how do we want to exist in this space? Like, I don't know about you, but I'm hard on myself. I was always hard on myself. So I didn't need a discipline that was going to make me feel already worse about myself than I already did. I wanted a discipline that had more love and more joy and more acceptance, and that had more than one speed to it. You know, it's not just go all the time. And really, if we kind of like dissect yoga, it's about being in the place in the middle, not about extremes. So why are we doing these freaky deaky poses thinking that they're going to qualify us to be like better humans? They don't. Like, your value isn't wrapped up in, like, if you're lifting weights, your value isn't wrapped up in how much you can lift or press, right? It's not about the pose. It's about functionality and balance, right? And so I think the thing that's always been missing from the original model of yoga that came here was joy. And because the physical practice is still being taught that way, people miss out on it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that middle ground, what does that look like? Because you touched on a couple of things there. Because I am a firm believer. I mean, it's not a firm believer. There's scientific evidence to back this, that you do have to put the body under a certain amount of stress to see transformation. Whether it's strength, put on lean muscle, you know, to be more mobile, you have to have a certain element of stress.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that? Because I see people come in, like, one of the things that you actually pointed out to me, these people come in and they're crazy hypermobile, and they'll come in and they start doing the splits, and they're like, they think that, like, they're great at yoga because they can do the splits, and you're saying, no, what you need to work on,
Reel it in.
You need to reel it in. You're really putting your joints in a very compromised position.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of practice that middle ground where you're saying, you know what, you got to push yourself, but don't push yourself to the point where you're tearing yourself down?
Well, a lot of that comes from the teacher. Like, the teacher can derail a class really fast. And I don't think teachers were taught how to teach yoga, like how to hold space for a room full of people, that where you have a personality plays a part, like kind of like we were talking before the recording went live. When you're, if you don't know what your mental patterns are and what motivates you or demotivates you, then you're kind of, it's almost like the definition of insanity. You keep hitting your head against the wall and not making change. And so one of the things that I do pretty much in every class is I'm also trying to figure out where people are on that day. Energy levels can wax and wane. You come into a class and you just lost your job.
Right.
You're just barely there. You come into class and you just lost a significant other. You do know what I'm saying? And so we have to be mindful of where we are. In our battery pack, so to speak, of how much energy we have. As far as making the change, I think it's there's a narrow chasm in that spot where we are putting up the right amount of stress on the body versus being passive and complacent. And it's a fine line. And I think, at least from my experience, what I've seen is it's us kind of watching, or the teachers watching the students to make sure that on any given day, they're not going too far. And I see bodies, but I see mechanics when I see people move. And I can look at some people and think, I don't think this is the right version of the movement for them. And I may, like, walk with them after class and say, why don't you try this instead? Like, does that make sense?
It does.
So there's a form that people learn when they teach yoga, but the form is irrelevant if it's not lending to function or if it's harming. And so we do a lot of feedback, and it makes some of the new folks uncomfortable sometimes when they come in. I'm like, okay, where do you feel this? And they're like, oh, she's talking to me. Yeah. I'm like, yeah, because everybody's got the ability to move differently. And so if I don't know what you're feeling and you're not paying attention to what you're feeling, we're not going to make a change. Right. And so it's almost like there's an accountability and there's a conversation that's happening in the class. It's not irreverent. Like, we have fun, but sometimes I got crews that I'll have to reel in. I'll be like, okay, now let's focus on what we're doing. But I think it's important that we think about the variability of mental energy that's coming into class too. It's not just what's your physical capability. Did I answer your question?
No, you absolutely did. And I think that people think that being a yoga teacher is just, you're going up there and you're just showing them the poses, you're calling them out. But what you just shared, you were constantly dialed in the entire class, the entire time. You're holding space for people. You're looking at how they're moving in their bodies. You're making corrections. You're doing all these things. You're not just sitting up there saying, hey, look at me. Look how great I am. Look at how great I can do this pose. Yeah. You should be trying to aspire to do the pose like I can. Like, you're meeting people where they are. Yeah. And I don't think that for people that, I guess I just want to get this point across, because there's a certain sacredness that you
Yeah.
approach your teaching with.
Oh yeah.
And I think that people that are listening or watching this, if you're trying to find a yoga teacher or yoga facility that does things the right way, your facility does it the right way. There's
That's
no
very
doubt
sweet.
about it, because
We try hard.
yeah, and I think a lot of people think that it's just, you know what, I can go anywhere. It's yoga's yoga.
Yeah.
You know, right? I mean, it's downward dog is downward dog. Upward dog is upward dog. You know, cobra pose is cobra pose.
Yeah.
Isn't it all the same? And what I'm hearing you say is it's not.
Mm-mm.
It's not the same.
Mm-mm.
It's dependent on how you move in your body.
The other cool thing is like we give people permission to be like, this pose doesn't work for me.
Mhm.
You know, because I mean, it's very rare that someone comes in with nothing, like no pain, no hardware, no previous surgeries. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it happens, and that's great. But then the more than likely, people are coming in, and the fascinating thing about us is that once we've passed an injury or we've recovered, we forget about it.
Mhm.
And so until I do kind of extensive conversations with people before they join us, I'll ask them, you know, okay, well, let's go to upper body. And they'll say, oh, I'm fine. I don't have any pain. And then I'll get into the minutia, and they'll be like, oh, I forgot I had shoulder surgery. And I'm like, yeah. How long ago was that? Because you want to be sensitive to where people are in their healing path. And also, like, I'll straight up tell somebody, like, you can't come to this class.
Mhm.
Like, you have to do a step up in between or something different. You have to finish PT after surgery before you come back to me. I've lost clients because I've pissed people off because I wouldn't give them what they wanted. And I was like, it's always potential that somebody's going to get hurt on your dime, like on your watch, so to speak. But as much as I can, in my good conscience, keep that to a very minimum, that's what I want to do.
Right.
Because you know what? Once you're hurt, you're on IR, right? You're on the injured reserve. You can't come back to yoga. Does that make sense? You can't do your workouts. You push yourself too hard, you're screwed.
That's right.
So,
and I think that people think, I mean, obviously we live in this extreme society now where everything is, the harder, the more you push yourself, the better off you're going to be. You're going to get better results faster. And I've seen that just cause so much harm to so many people.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, people don't want to go through the process and realize that the process can be slow, and that change usually is incremental. It's very rarely we making these huge leaps and bounds. People want the huge leaps and bounds, and they want it yesterday, but it's a practice. That's the reason why it's a practice. You've got to continue to do it and do it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, as an aging person, I think one of the conversations I'm having with myself, because I work with all ages, and is at some point I'm going to have to sit down to put my pants on. And I'm going to have a conversation with myself on that. Like my mobility, my balance, I take for granted that I stand up and put my pants on, right? I don't use a wall. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm going to have that conversation with myself. I'm trying to be like, put it out there so I can hear myself later say, you're going to have to bench yourself one day and sit down. Do you know what I mean? For safety's sake.
That's right.
And so as our bodies change, we have to be willing to make certain changes. But I also think if we stay steady with the movement practice, we're more likely to age well.
That's right.
To be able to be functional, to have more joy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But as far as extreme yoga poses go, I think the biggest mistake I hear rookie teachers, even some of the senior teachers say is like, you'll get there if you keep trying. And I'm like, we were laughing about the splits earlier, right? If the femurs don't sit in the socket a certain way, you may not be able to do that. Or if you have calcification or whatever. And then also like, and why do we want to do the splits? Yeah. That's my first question. Like, what? I don't want to do the splits. I don't ever want to accidentally end up in that position. Right. And so when you tell students if they keep trying, they'll get there, that's a recipe for an injury. You know, and it's also a recipe to, I think, harm spirit. Like people that want to be successful and you keep telling them, if you keep trying hard enough, you'll get there. And it's like, maybe that's not what they need to hear.
Yeah.
You know.
Right. I want to make a little bit of a shift. So what made you make the decision to become a business owner? And the reason why I'm asking that question is because obviously you're very well versed in yoga, very well versed in how people move in their bodies. It's something that you could have continued to do as a yoga teacher. So what made you say, you know what, this is the time? Did you ever aspire to be a business owner, or was it like, you know what,
No.
this is the time to do it? Like, how did that happen?
No, it's funny. I never wanted to be a studio owner. And as a matter of fact, when I started renting a little space, people were like, "Oh, your studio." I was like, "It's not a studio. It's a tiny space." Like I pushed against that thought for a long time. And I think most of it had to do with the little girl inside of me that's extremely stubborn. And that's strength and weakness. We can come back to this. We can circle back. Strength and weaknesses are one and the same. They ride a fine line. And so the stubbornness has helped me sometimes, sometimes hindered me.
That's right.
But the stubbornness in me was like, I couldn't in good conscience teach in a way that I didn't think was the most effective. And I needed to have a space for me that I push the restart button. And I cautiously use the word control because I don't want people to think I'm a control freak, but I do think that there needs to be checks and balances with everybody in a facility, and personalities can vary, but the method can't. And if the method gets too far out there or people start going rogue, like a lot of the new teachers are doing nowadays, again, it waters down the efficacy. I don't want you to feel like you've been throwing darts in the dark if you've been practicing with me. I want you to see a change, right? It could be with your attitude. And I don't mean that like you got a bad attitude, but it could be a shift on the internal as much as a shift in the physical. I don't really care. It's not my job to navigate that. You have to be open to the teachings. I have to be willing to meet you halfway. And so the space really kind of came more about wanting to make sure that what was being offered was consistent, you know?
Yeah.
And that the people's money was being respected. Like, I mean, because I remember when I first started practicing, I was like, I didn't have a lot of money in yoga. I thought, like, I don't know if I want to spend my money on this. And then I realized it was a lifeline for me. I was like, oh, I do want to spend my money on this. But when people work hard for their money and they give it to you for a purpose, then what you're giving them should be your absolute best. Right. There should be consistency and accountability. And so that's kind of what happened.
Yeah.
And then my little space, we popped out of it pretty fast.
Yep, grew out of it.
And so it was a leap of faith, opening up an actual studio and becoming a business owner. But it was, if I wanted to keep teaching, that was kind of the next step for me.
Right.
You know, I'd hoped to find more people like me out there in the teacher realm.
Not so much.
That's harder.
Yeah.
And so it's funny because people are always like, I was called to teach yoga. And I was like, no, you weren't. But there are some people who are. And I've been lucky enough to have some teachers that I feel were definitely called to do this. Some of it has to do with the way that they process the information and the way that they relate it back to the students. It's impressive. And so when I see a teacher that's been around for a long time that is so effective in what they do, that I trained, I'm like, I'm happy mama bear.
Yeah.
I'm like, I love this. Yeah. Hell yeah. Like, that's look right. And sometimes the students don't see the teachers growing into their own because they've been around for so long. But I can see it, and it makes me really, really proud.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like you said, you're somebody that you kind of taken them under your tutelage, and now they're growing.
Yeah.
So how do you, to that point, how do you vet your teachers? How do you determine who's going to be a viable teacher for your studio?
It's hard. So originally it was all teacher training. I was going to do a teacher training. I thought if I can give them the information and be very intentional about what I give them, then I'm going to have great teachers. It does not matter how good the information is or how intentional you are if people can't receive the information. So I've hired some people that I didn't train and did a little bit of like a side conversation on a lot of it has to do with philosophy and how they approach their students. And I'll tell them up front, these are deal breaker poses. If you're going to teach these, you can't, we're not going to jive. And so, you know, sometimes I don't even get past an interview process, and I've gotten aware at this point I really don't try to hire outside of my training.
Yeah.
But I like to tell people that think they want to teach yoga, and I've learned this the hard way, you have to be a public speaker. So some introverts make great yoga teachers because they're very thoughtful and contemplative, but they can get tapped out really fast because you're talking all the time and you're also in a room full of people. And so if you are not a good public speaker or you're uncomfortable speaking at all, don't do it.
Right.
Like, it doesn't matter how much you love yoga. If you can't put sentences together, this is a bad call. Like, don't waste your money.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I look for people who have a curiosity about the body itself and not about the poses. Like, somebody says, "Is this the right way to do the pose?" I'm like, you didn't hear anything I just said. Do you know what I mean? So I look for people who are curious about that. There has to be a compassionate quality, but that can't be the only thing. Like, you can't be a bleeding heart and be a yoga teacher. As much as people think that that's the quintessential yoga teacher, you can't really be a bleeding heart. You have to be, can I say, you have to have a set of balls.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Because you have to have boundaries. Like, you have to have, and this was more so as a business owner, because there's a crossover. Like, there's nobody in our group now that I don't consider family. You come, you stick around long enough, you're in. You know, it's kind of like the mob, whether you want to be or not, you're in. Yeah. And so they're family. And so with family, sometimes people don't mean to take advantage of you, but they can try. And so I had to learn where to put the boundaries on, which boundaries are workable, and then what's a hard boundary. And that has to do with, like, my time and my energy and my space and all that. And if I see a teacher that's really, really enthusiastic and loving but has bad boundaries, I'm going to be like, okay, we got to talk about this. Like, it's not your job to save everybody. That's not what a yoga teacher does. You know, so it's a lot. I think what I learned is that if I ever did another training, I would not do a 200-hour training. I would be 500. You're either in or out.
Yeah, so you got to go deep. You got to be immersed in it, go completely deep in it.
Yeah, because as soon as people start teaching, they get a little bit of ego about them. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, I'm comfortable. I don't need more training or more understanding. But the juxtaposition is, the more that you know, the more you need to practice so that you can figure out how what you're saying is translating in your body, other people's bodies. And so, yeah, I think that people need to be, they're either long haul, but you can, like, pay for a weekend training.
That's right. Yeah. And then all of a sudden become certified.
That's so scary.
It's very, very scary.
I know you know this, though.
Yeah. I mean, that scares me to death, because I see.
It's in the coaching world too, though.
It is. I mean, you get this level of credential. That's, you know, you take this certain test or whatever it is, and all of a sudden now you're certified, and now they're in the door and coaching people, and you're watching them, and you're just like, you have no idea what you're doing. Like, you have no idea. You're going to hurt that person doing those things.
And giving really bad advice. Like,
that's right.
Oh, you're a yoga teacher. I didn't know that you were also supposed to give people life advice, or I didn't know you got a nutritionist degree with your yoga teaching. Do you know what I mean? Like, those things gripe my ass, but whatever. We could, I mean, how much time do we have? Yeah.
We could go down a rabbit hole with that.
How much time do we have?
We could go down. So
squirrel.
Yeah. So speaking, there's a big redhead squirrel that I wanted to ask you about, which is your teacher. Yeah. Because you talk about continuing down he's not a squirrel. He's a big, huge South African gentleman.
He's a big freaking bear.
He is. So how do you continue to practice, and how do you continue to work with you? So, okay, I guess let me back that up.
Yeah.
So who is somebody that you continue to look up to, somebody that is your teacher, somebody that you put all your eggs into that particular person's basket? Who is that person, and kind of who is that person to you?
Multiple people.
Okay.
And I say multiple people because if it's a movement thing, I'll go to Jordan. And she will not like me saying this, but if it's a movement thing, I'll also call Katie Taylor, who you know very well. Because Katie looks at things from a different angle. We're both looking at the same thing, but at a different angle. And so sometimes I'll be like, hey. And I'll also ask her to check me too. Like, if I'm dealing with a difficult situation, whether it's business or whatever, I'll be like, if you have time, I want to run this by you, because she has a great, she's got like litmus paper everywhere. And so I trust her a lot. So there are certain things I'll ask her about. I have another friend that's a teacher out of state. I'll get her to check me on things. I've been doing this for a long time. And I remember I had one teacher that said, you're going to pass your teacher one day. And I was like, never. I thought that would be so scary to be on your own. And I kind of am. But again, I I keep myself in check with people that I know are not going to lie to me and tell me what they think I want to hear.
Right.
That's really important, to have people that are honest around you. Jordan is the person that I go to for physical stuff, even though, gosh, I don't remember the last time we practiced together, but I started hosting him once I had a facility. That was the perk of having a space, is that I could call the shots and be like, hey, I want you guys to experience what I experienced. Because let's be clear, I'm a little bit sweeter than he is in the practice. And so, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it was an opportunity for people to go, oh, this is what you were doing. And I was like, yeah, for 5 days or whatever, and so Jordan was kind of the person that I trusted, and I think a lot of it has to do with, like, he's a no bullshitter.
Yes.
Like, philosophically, life-wise, he'll ask you the questions that you wish he didn't ask you, and then not let you not answer them.
That's right.
And so, and he became, I mean, it was weird because, yes, like 6'5", South African, super intimidating. And the first time that I met him, I was in Miami. I'll never forget. It was one of the first trainings that I'd done outside of the state. And I felt like I did not belong. And I see this big dude coming my way. He's assisting, and he's trying to help me with something that we were doing partner-wise. And he was kind, and you can't miss him because he's the biggest guy in the room. Right. And then a couple of years later, I had an opportunity to go to a workshop where he was teaching, and I was like, that guy seems so solid. And so we met, and there was a click. I was like, oh, of all the people I've studied with, some great people, some people I probably still would if they were still teaching, some I definitely would not still study with. He was solid, and I was like, I think this is going to be somebody I can trust. And I didn't take everything that he taught me word for word. Like, at that point in my career, I realized, like, I needed to ask questions. Like, this is what you're saying, but is it really true, or does it apply to everyone, or are there loopholes in this? And he was okay with that conversation. So he was very intimidating at first, and he ended up being, like, literally like family. Yeah. Like, one of the closest people in my life. So even though he's not physically in the same state with me, we are tight to this day.
Yeah. When he came to the studio and he started to work with us, I mean, big, gregarious guy, but to your point, I mean, sweet, but very pointed. He would get straight to the heart of the matter on things. And then when he grabs a hold of you and, like, he's helping you out with a pose. Yeah. I mean, I consider myself to be a pretty strong guy, but there's just something about him. He just grabs a hold, and you're like, he could really kind of probably hurt me if I try to make a move on him. He could put me like in an arm bar or something like that. Yeah. And so I was just impressed with, because to me, I think that a lot of people, when they look at men, they think that like masculinity is just like, it's like this toxic masculinity where you gotta be this hard ass, this tough guy. It's all about discipline. But there's an element of you're disciplined, but then there's also this element of sweetness, and he brings that. And I appreciated that in that short period of time that I worked with him. He was a really cool guy, and I would love to cross paths with him again down in the future.
It's funny because this is totally off topic, but he loves the hang in Jackson when he was here. He loved the food, he loved the people, and so he has fond memories of all the places, because he's traveled to traveled to Japan and done lots of stuff there, and Germany, and he's got a little special place in his heart for Jackson. I'd like to think I had a little bit to do with that.
I would say so.
But yeah, I got to a point where, and this may be a conversation for another time, but yoga teachers are notorious for, like, if you don't have a grounded yoga teacher, like somebody who's deeply rooted, then you end up becoming that weirdo. Like, you're like, I gotta get my yoga hit. I gotta get my yoga high. And I tell people, like, don't chase euphoria because it will go away.
It's a high. I mean, it's a bit
and
of
then
an
you
addiction.
come back for it, just kind of like you come back, like if you're addicted to cardio. Yeah. I don't know who would be.
I know some people.
Right.
Yeah.
I've made peace with my cardio. I do it. I've made peace. But yeah, and so I think I scrolled myself and now I lost it. I don't know where I am. Where are we?
Well, you were just talking about the euphoria and people chasing the euphoria and the fact that people do that.
And it's just, and I can see those people when they come in, I can almost like pick them out now. I'm like, oh, they're not going to like what I'm doing, because I also slow them down. Like, they're like, oh, they want to do really fast yoga, roid it out. And I'm like, you need to chill out.
Right.
Like the whole purpose of why you're here is to not do that. And so I'll slow people down, make them get in their bodies, make them communicate. Like, I think one of my base statements is yoga is about a relationship that you have with yourself. Right. And all of your other relationships are going to be much better if you have a good relationship with yourself. Again, it has nothing to do with how many fancy poses you can do.
That's right.
Like, mastery of a pose does not mean shit to me. It really doesn't. I don't care. I'm like, I love it when people feel empowered in their bodies. It's not like I'm not making changes for folks and we're not doing the work, but I am not attracted to, I just did this pose. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a certain level of ego, and not to say, look, I think that people think like the whole premise behind what we're trying to do is just remove ego. I think a certain amount of healthy ego is a good thing.
Sure.
But when you're doing it for the purpose of feeding the ego, you're completely going against the whole premise behind what you're doing it for. At least that's the way that I view it.
Yeah.
You talk about slowing down. So as a business owner, pandemic hits. How do you pivot?
Pivot?
How do you pivot?
Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm referencing the Friends episode where they're going up the stairwell.
Oh, yeah. They're carrying the couch. Like, they're carrying the pivot. Yeah, that's right.
So I actually was teaching one day. I'm going to squirrel you and we'll come back to that. I was teaching one day and I was telling people to move a certain way. And I was like, pivot. And I just totally squirreled myself in class. And we had to stop and have a good laugh about it. And now when I say it, we all laugh at the pivot. How did I pivot? I'll tell you this. I didn't want to do online classes. I was like, because I know how important that interaction is. Like, for me, all of my training was in person. I never did an online training. Right. And so it's fascinating when people are like, I got my training online. I was like, how did you observe other people moving? How did you teach practice classes? Like, what the fuck? Seriously, like, I don't understand. And some of these people are precious. I'm like, nothing against you, but whoever said that this was going to make you a good yoga teacher, I don't get it. And so I was very much against doing classes online, Zooming and all that stuff until I realized, like, this thing isn't going away anytime soon. And I have a lot of high-risk people in my demographic. I was caregiving for high-risk people at the time. I did not have time for Joe Schmo to come in and breathe his cooties on me and put me out of commission. So we decided, let's try some online. So I went out of my way, huge screen, so in like, if you're looking at a laptop, somebody's like this big. Right. I had a big screen that I would pull a card table up in my house and like plug in. And I was literally like standing in front of a monitor watching people move. But what I realized is, even though it's not what I would have wanted to do, it was the best thing we could do at the time. And people needed an anchor because it was just the most bizarre thing. And so I was like, if I can be an anchor this way, then this will have to do for now. It's kind of like, do what you can with what you have. And then when you know better or you can do better, do better.
Hi, Angela, yeah.
Yeah, so that's what we were working with. But I learned a lot during that time, which was like, I had gotten into a space where I was picking up slack for all the teachers that bailed, that came in, that were like gung-ho and lasted 6 months to a year. And I'm like, I created this space for you. I've trusted you with my people, and now you bailed. And it is what it is, but they left me picking up the pieces, which was the exact opposite reason of why I trained them in the first place. I'm like, I need people underneath me to help pick up some slack so that we can spread love, the yoga love, right? Like, and I promised myself, and I haven't broken this promise, that I never put anything more on the schedule than I can handle by myself if something were to happen, which happened recently. Ann. Ann's my left hand, right hand, I don't know. And very seldom does Ann need backup, but she got sick. And so I taught all of the classes with the exception of one. Lisa jumped in on one. And I was like, well, that was hard. Being a business owner and teaching all of those classes, wouldn't want to do it all the time. And I know that if something happened, she could do the same for me. But it's a lot more work than people realize. And so I made that promise. I was like, I'm never going to load that schedule up again, no matter how much other people are like, well, your competition's doing this. I'm like, nobody's competition for me.
Yeah.
I don't feel that. Like, people are like, well, there are all these studios popping up. It's like, they're not competition. Nobody does what we do.
Right.
And I don't mean that to toot my own horn. I'm just like, I wish more people did because I'd hire them. But nobody does what we do. And so I'm my own worst competition, right? Little squirrels.
Yeah.
So we all have to get on board, temper ourselves, slow ourselves down. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
So anyway.
And speaking of that, just to shift gears, because you talked about how y'all do things differently, and I know you've hosted some grief.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to get a little bit more into the grief side of things, because I know that's something that you've done. You've done some, what's the word that I'm looking for? I'm having
Man, I don't know.
a moment right now. Workshop, grief workshops.
Oh,
That's what I was
yeah,
looking
yeah.
for, and that's
Okay.
something that's unique. I've not seen any other studio do anything along those lines. So
Yeah, because it's so much fun.
yeah, right. I was gonna say, well, I know a lot of people are out there dealing with it, but at the same time, how do you
Yeah.
promote that? But I
Yeah.
guess the question really is where does that come from? What made you make
Yeah.
that decision?
So I think because I got in my body with yoga, like I was, functioning, moving, going to work, I felt pain too, but yoga made me stop and be in my body and like connect to left and right. And what are you actually feeling? And I didn't know there was a muscle there. Is there a muscle there, kind of thing? And so another kind of limb of that was that I also was like, I'm never going to meditate. Like, that's cool. Can I be a yoga teacher and not meditate? Like, I literally asked that question because I was like, I don't want to meditate ever. What I didn't understand was how meditation didn't have to be, but could be a very sacred exchange with yourself,
Right.
where you're preparing yourself for the day, or you're checking in with like, hey, am I dealing with some anger? Or is there any joy in my life right now? What have I done to rob myself of something that is essential in my life? But a really powerful thing happened when I started doing meditation and setting up like a little station for grief, for my grief. My mom, there's a picture of my mom, my dad. I mean, I didn't put everybody on there because I didn't have a big enough table, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But like, it became a very powerful experience, and I wanted to give that to people. And when I first started doing, I called it Good Grief because I thought about Charlie Brown. Good grief, Charlie Brown.
Yeah.
So I called it Good Grief, y'all. And there were times when it was just me telling my story, and I thought, well, that's going to get boring. Nobody wants to just hear about me. But also, when you have a group like that, you want to make sure that you're not opening up a space for everybody to just come undone. So it needs to feel safe for everybody. Everybody doesn't have to share. And so I moved into a physical practice of like, let's be in our bodies because grief can get us physically stuck. And over time, that's evolved into more of a generous and very kind and loving physical practice. So people who don't do yoga could come to that and not feel like the odd man out. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
And so it's a little bit of movement, and then we talk about, or I'll talk about an aspect of grief that I've been maybe working with, or something that kind of was very helpful for me. But I'm very intentional about saying there's no 5-step yoga program for grief. And if you see that, run away, because those people just want to capitalize on your pain.
Right.
And for a long time, I actually didn't charge for those events. And then Jordan was like,
You have to.
you need to charge your worth. And I was like, I didn't want to make money off of people's pain, right?
Yeah.
But he was like, but you have experience that nobody else
That's
does.
right. That's right.
And I was like, okay. So I did start charging, but we'd also have a space available. So for Mother's Day, it was like, you lost your mom, come hang out. And then afterwards, it was optional, come and go. Like, you could stick around and hang out. You could leave if you didn't want to be in a group of people talking about their moms. But what happened was absolutely brilliant. And same with Father's Day, is these people were like, they wanted to share. And the cool thing is, like, it sounds kind of weird, but when you're in a space with other people who've had that significant loss, you're like, oh, you're my people.
Yeah.
You get it.
Yeah.
And so there's this almost like the steam, like just the shoulders relax and people start to feel like they're seen, as opposed to being the one person that's like, and I remember what it was like to hate the holidays. Like, I don't hate Mother's Day or Father's Day anymore. I embrace them. But I remember, like, early on in the grief, I was like, this sucks. Do you know? And so giving people permission to to also be angry about their loss is important. And so we just kind of made it about who showed up.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It was really cool.
That is cool. And I think you hit on something there, because I think that people, we're in the South. We're in the Bible Belt. And so there's a lot of things, teachings out there. Like you don't show these certain types of emotions. You don't, if you're experiencing that, maybe that's some type of sin, you need to get yourself right.
Right.
But at the end of the day, when you just stuff those things down, I mean, just how dangerous that is.
It's a hot damn mess.
How much, how dangerous is that?
Yeah.
And it's going to come out in some other way, some ugly way. So, obviously the fact that you're providing that space for people is really cool. Obviously, grief is something that you've dealt with pretty extensively in your life. I mean, going back to your bio. So do you mind sharing a little bit about your history? I know you said you're willing to talk about these things, and you feel like it's something you do on a pretty regular basis.
And you know what's weird is I forget that people don't know. I think that when people see me, they're like, "Oh, that's the girl that everybody died."
Yeah.
And so I forget that I don't talk about it a lot in free form, because it can be a Debbie Downer moment. Like, wah, wah, like there's one girl at the cocktail party over in the corner talking about dead folks. And so I acknowledge that, but I also love that grief is not taboo anymore, or at least we're trying to not make it taboo anymore. So my first loss was my granddad, who I was really tight with. And I think I was 5 or 6. And when you're a kid and you lose one person, it's a fluke. Right? Like kids lose, I'm sure, grandparents all the time, their favorite people, or you lose a pet. But then more than likely, it's going to be years before you have another loss. And I mean, my mom was like a year or 2 after him. And so I went from, missing my buddy, my granddad, and wanting to see him, and then just having to figure out ways to be like, he's not coming back. So that was like, oh, well, that's a fluke. And then when my mom died, I was like, is this going to keep happening?
Yeah. And real quick, how old were you?
I was in 2nd grade when my mom died. Yeah. And there's parts of that I still can't remember. And there's parts of it that I can't not remember, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I woke up one morning, went into the living room. My mom had been in the hospital because she had had a heart attack. And so she had, health issues and everything. And the word that they used with me was that she was getting better and she was in remission. And so I knew it was different. My grandmother, who her husband, my grandfather, had died, she moved in with us to help kind of keep the household afloat. So Dad was working, Mama was cooking, and, it was weird, but it is what it is.
Right.
And it was normal to me. And the beauty about stuff like that with children is like, they can adapt really well. So that was my new norm. I didn't think it was weird to have my grandmother living with us. It was just the thing. And so I got up one morning, went down the hallway. My mom wasn't sitting in her chair. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm rocking. I'm like, I beat Mom up this morning. And then, like, I'll never forget the feeling in the room. It was like they sucked the air out of it. And I knew something was wrong. Like, even as a 2nd grader, I was like, something is way wrong here. And they were trying to figure out how to tell me she was already gone. She died in our home the night before. She didn't make it to the hospital. And so they didn't tell me that as a 2nd grader. They said she had another heart attack. She didn't make it to the hospital in time, which was true. But I appreciate that they didn't tell me that she died in our home, because I don't know that I could have handled that information.
Being there.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, being there, right.
Strangely enough, so then fast forward, so that happens, and I'm just like, okay, well, and we're in the South. We're going to have the religious conversation. Your mom's in heaven. She's in a better place. And I was like, I don't think so. She needs to be with me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I was like, but I was such a quiet child that I was just processing all this internally, and I was like, but you'll be reunited with her, when you go to heaven. I was like, how fast can I get to heaven? I mean, children are literal, so I think we need to be more careful how we talk about grief and loss to them and the promises that we make. That's just the truth.
Yeah.
And I could put money on it that other kids that were in that same situation probably thought the same thing. What's the fastest way? Is there a train? How do I get there?
Yeah.
And so that was a thing. And then my dad died when I was 15 in the same home, lung cancer. And I was like, hey, God, I think you got this wrong. Like, it really challenged my
doing?
faith, and
Yeah.
all the people around me were giving me these sing-song things. I was like, y'all hadn't been through hell.
Mhm.
Like, please don't tell me it's going to be okay if you don't know.
Yeah.
Because from where I'm sitting, nobody's here. It's
Mhm.
not okay. You know, and that was probably what sparked my anger.
Mhm.
And it was internal because, right, we're not
Yeah.
as good little people that were brought up in the church. We're not supposed to be angry,
Yeah.
especially
No,
not at God.
not supposed to show that. Absolutely
Yeah.
not.
And so, yeah. And of course, they wanted to take, go to therapy. And at that time, I was like, I ain't doing it. So that didn't go well. I went once, and it was probably the most combative I've ever been in my entire life, was in therapy as a 15-year-old,
Yeah. Yeah. Being a teenager, vulnerable already. Now you're having to go through this and then open up and share about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't.
Yeah,
He was
not
like, how'd
happening.
that make you feel? And I was like, fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just like, I looking back, can't believe that I was such a shithead in therapy, but I was.
But you were hurt. I mean, you were in extreme pain, and on top of it, you're a teenager.
Yeah.
And you got all these other stuff.
Now
happening.
I'm a huge fan of therapy, but I also think, like, you can't force people to go when they don't want to go.
That's right.
There's a time and a place.
Right.
But anyway, so that kind of set my trajectory on being different, and not always fitting in, and it's okay. And I think that yoga, when I found that, I was like, oh, it's okay to be different, and it's okay to be you, and it's okay to own your pain, your suffering, your anger, and kind of going back through those emotions. It was really powerful for me to acknowledge the anger, because at the time I didn't. I mean, I was angry, but I didn't know how to deal with it or process it. So I was like, well, let's just carry this around like a 800-pound boulder and see where it gets us. Nowhere. And then when my grandmother died, who was the only one left in the house with me, right? So mom dies, dad dies, mama's there. When she dies, I think for me it was like, I don't know where my north is anymore. Like, I didn't know where my compass was. And that's when the anger really kicked in. Like, next level, I didn't know I could feel that way. Because I'm sweet. Like, people that know me, like, she's so sweet. I was like, I have a side.
Yeah.
No.
And so grief, yoga, how did those two merge for you? Like, whenever we talked about, like, how you found yoga, part of it you said, was it because you were fumbling your way through exercise? When you got into yoga, you had some struggles from a physical standpoint. Did you recognize that there was some maybe potential healing that was happening as a result of that?
No.
Was there any kind of awareness along those lines?
No, not a chance. I was just like trying to do something to make me feel better. I mean, I was like, you need to work out. Not very successful at the gym, didn't jive with it. So I was trying to do something physically active for my body. It was strictly a physical thing.
Yeah.
And I remember even at one point, I was like, is this okay to do yoga? Like, is God going to be mad at me? Because, it was so new in Mississippi at the time. Right. It wasn't well practiced. It wasn't understood. Sometimes if I would tell people that I was practicing yoga, they would say yogurt. And I was like, no. Yeah. So I actually preferred it when people didn't know about it and I had to explain it, versus now when I have to be like, no, that's not what yoga is. Because now I have to go through the whole gamut of, like,
Some people still can call it like yoga and like a Ouija board. They'll talk about it in the same breath. They'll be like, "Oh my God, you're doing yoga?
Yeah,
you're inviting in."
So how the healing process happened for me, getting in touch with my body, and then the mental pattern stuff came later, and a lot of that probably ended up being with Jordan. But I was ready for it. Like, I was like, oh, I am creating my own suffering. I'm orchestrating more misery. Yeah. Why? And so lots of humble moments, obviously, with myself. And I think what I realized is, like, I needed to give myself grace. I needed permission to love myself, that I was just fine, just like I was. Yes, I'm a work in progress, but, like, celebrate who you are. And also, like, going back to remember I told you there's a book I was going to.
Yeah. I wanted to get
the book of joy.
Yeah.
We are meant to live in joy. And I was like, shit. So I'd been working on peace for a long time. Like, that was my thing. I was just unsteady. Grief makes you not know where your feet are, or it makes your feet feel stuck in somewhere, a land far away from everybody else. It's just isolating. And the continuity that I found in my body and in my mind through yoga was helping me go back through and, like, I called it grief reconciliation. Like, think about my mom and what happened when she died and how I felt, and can I reconcile that, and can I start to feel more joy and less pain, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that with everybody that died,
Yeah.
and I'm still doing it because people still keep dying.
That's right. I was going to say, and it's like when you have that much grief back to back, there has to be certain level, because if you just
10
allow
car
it to
pile up,
because
right?
if you just allow it to flow through you, I mean, you just become so overwhelmed. I don't
Yeah.
know how you can even live.
Oh, yeah. So I discovered, I think this is what happened for me as a kid, and I think I just kept doing it. Compartmentalization, right?
Mhm,
You can
yeah,
do that.
yeah.
But it's a feelings valve, right? I
Okay.
call it,
Yeah.
that's the only way for me to describe it is when somebody dies, a lot of times to go, what's the next step? My feelings valve cuts off.
Mhm.
It's like, stop for a second. And like, let's deal with this from a pragmatic situation.
Mhm.
Like, depending on who the person is and how close I am, like, do I need to make arrangements? Who do I need to call?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like,
That's right. That's right. You get into that
because
mindset. Yeah.
people forget that when somebody dies, there's all this logistical
There's a
stuff.
lot of stuff you got to do for
And
you.
it can be really messy.
Mhm.
And so there's all these things. And for me, because I've done it so much, one of my defaults was to be there for other people, right? But that also keeps you from turning in and being like, well,
That's
what am
right.
I dealing with? So I definitely have to catch myself sometimes in that space. Like, I know now I can't save every person that's lost someone because it's, it's overwhelming. I just know that I can be a voice of reason, solid.
Yeah.
Give people permission to be pissed. Give people permission to be sad and want to crawl under their bed and not come out. I get that. I get all of those feelings because I had them all.
Right.
Yeah.
So give people space. I mean, you're giving people space because a lot of people think that you have to be, whenever somebody's dealing with something that heavy, that you have to be this voice of reason, or give them some biblical verse, and this too shall pass, and all of these things. And at the end of the day, that can cause more harm and cause them to be pissed off at you and say, how insensitive and how callous are you to come to me with these things?
Yeah.
I'm just coming to you. I just need a sounding board. I just need somebody just to vent and just drop this stuff on. So providing somebody space, I mean, I think we can't emphasize how important that is.
But we're so uncomfortable.
Yeah. And it's like, how do I do this? Oh my God, what do I need to say?
Yeah. Sit with them. I mean, when my mother-in-law was, so Dave's mom, we lost her about 3 years ago. And she's not even in my book. Like, at some point I had to cut off the people I was writing about because I would never finish the book. But also, like, her death was too soon. And I know that I'm going to have so many more waves of grief with her that I was like,
not prepared for this. Yeah.
I wanted to give, if I was going to write a chapter about her, she needed a lot of stuff.
Right.
She needed time and attention that I wasn't ready to kind of write about. So, but one of the things that I learned about myself is I'm a giver and I'm a doer. So if I can do something for you when you're struggling, I feel okay, and like, whether it's food or flowers or a card or something, and all of those gestures are wonderful. Please don't get me wrong. They go a long way. And then with the physical body, like, I've learned so much about muscle and tissue. I'm like, there's a lot I can do for people that are mildly suffering, right? There's a lot I can do for my family. I couldn't with her. Like, her muscular disease got to a point that, like, she was bedridden, and there was nothing I could do. And I was like, this is the worst feeling ever. And I was like, okay, this is your challenge, right? Because you don't want to not be there for her. Like, my biggest regret with all the people that I've lost was, like, maybe not being with them when they died, or, not being fully present at the end of days to be able to communicate things that I needed to. And I was like, you're being given this opportunity. Like, don't mess it up.
Right.
So I would go and sit with her. Even if she was asleep, I would just sit by her bed, and I was like, this is the strongest thing you can do for anybody. It's just to sit there, be there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was so weird because I was like, if you can break your, I don't want to call them bad habits because I think there's good intention there, but if you can break some of those mental patterns, you can be so much more free.
Yeah.
And so instead of trying to fix her, which I couldn't, that was outside of my control, it was like, I'm going to give myself space to just be a body of support.
Yeah.
Just to be there.
Yeah. Yeah, and to give her that space too,
Mm-hmm.
and say like, I'm not showing up and bringing my stuff
Yeah.
to this,
Yeah.
like, because that's, I mean, going through what you had already gone through
Yeah.
beforehand, it would have been easy for you to carry that stuff into the room with you and say, okay, I'm going to try to do all the things that I wasn't able to do with my mom, my grandmother,
Yeah.
my dad.
Everybody.
But you know, and it's like, you know what, is that really what's best for her? What
Yeah.
is best for her? And giving yourself that space to do that reflection,
Yeah.
and then giving that to her, like, that's the greatest gift you can give, right?
It's a love language that I think is hard to speak and hard to hear.
Right.
So you have to have like lots of vulnerability and tenderness to be able to do it. You know, I'm grateful. Like, you know, I wish she was here, obviously. Sometimes, so when I do stuff and talk about grief, I have things like, this was my grandmother's, these rings were my mother-in-law's, this was my mom's. Like, I always like make sure they're with me, because I'm like, I got to bring the whole ancestral family, you know. But it makes me feel like, you know, they're really not that far away anyway. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, 100%.
But yeah, I think when you're trying to offer up something for somebody who's grieving, especially, you got to take into consideration, like, how did the person die? Be very careful.
Yeah.
Right. And so even though the generic phrases are things that people don't want to say, they want to come up with something very lofty. I'm like, generic phrases are good. I'm here if you need me. I'm happy to just sit with you, or I can talk, or I can listen. Like, some people just want you to ramble so that they don't have to talk and process stuff, you know.
Yeah.
Some people just want you to sit there and be a wall and talk to you. So I'm sorry for your loss is a very legitimate thing. Like, if you mean it, they'll feel it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be like, you know, 7 years ago.
Yeah.
You don't need any of that. You know what I mean? And so I think it's really powerful for people to know that's the best thing. Oh, and you also don't need to be the first person to put it on Facebook.
Yeah. People think that's what you have to do.
Pet peeve.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Anyway.
So book. Tell me about the book.
The book. Started writing when I was in my 20s. I needed a way to connect to my grandmother. She was kind of like, she was the person who set me on this thing of like, I was mad. I was mad about my grief. I was mad about the amount of loss I'd had. And I felt like, obviously, since I wasn't in control of it, I was like, I kind of lived my life for a period of time like, who's next? If I can figure out who's next, maybe I can take the sting of the pain away. But with her, she was such a figure in my life. I mean, even more so than my father or my mother, because she was around the longest. I started writing a letter to her, and then I was like, I'm going to write a book. But like, if you're a griever, childhood griever, there's so much confidence for me that wasn't there. I didn't think I would ever finish the book. Well, I mean, 20 plus years later. And so I needed it to be personal, but I also wanted it to be creative, because one of the things that happens when you stop feeling so bound and so lost is you can tap into creativity, and that's different for everybody. But for me, so it was like, I wanted to go in order, Granddad. So there's a chapter, and I say chapter, it's very loose. Like, even the contents, I'm like, this is just messy. But it's like, I go in order of the people that I lost. And then I get to a point, I'm like, I cut it off. And I don't even remember who the last person I write about is. But like, I write about losing a really good friend of mine and how my feelings valve cut off because I was doing teacher training that weekend. And I was like, she's probably going to die. And I got to figure out how to go and ante up and do the thing that she would tell me to do, while still knowing that in my gut, like, I may not ever see her again. You know what I mean? And so there's all this stuff. And so I think probably the takeaway for people who have lost folks is that grief, we experience it differently at different phases in our lives. And so age does play a part in how you respond. So there's a little bit of, my own personal anecdotes from me, but then every person I wrote a song about. And so the song follows the chapter.
Yeah.
And a lot of times the song is written from the age perspective. So the one about my granddad sounds like a kid wrote it, because I wanted to tap into that person, that girl. And be like, this is how I felt. So it was powerful, and sometimes it was gut-wrenching. Like, sometimes I'd have to walk away from the book for months because I was like, I need to heal. Like, I felt like I was just kind of like the walking wounded, because grief is exhausting, and I wasn't always actively grieving, like somebody new is dying, I was going back into the trenches. I was like, let's dig up this old stuff and see what happens. Like, who does that?
Yeah.
I do. But yeah, and so the part 2 of the book will be the songs, the lyrics of the songs being put into music, sound.
When is that supposed to drop?
Oh, that's the none of the music. Well, I won't say that. The music is in creation.
Okay.
But it's going to be a minute because it's going to have to be
Yeah.
like top notch. So that's separate from the album with the band, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
That
Okay.
was like a creative project that I wanted to do on my own.
So when does the book go?
We just did the photo shoot for the cover last weekend. We were talking about that in Cemetery. So there's a little teaser there. You'll know where that's coming from. But I had this vision for what I wanted it to be, and we're still working on parts and pieces. It should, for all practical purposes, unless somebody else dies. I hope that's okay to laugh.
It is.
This year,
given what you've been through, I would say yes.
I gave myself boundaries, like the book's going to be before the end of the year. So I'm going to do self-publishing. I'm not going to go through another company because they're going to probably put me out another year. And I'm like, this creative baby is ready to come.
Yeah, it's ready to go.
She's coming out whether you want it or not.
Right.
So I'm hoping to kind of get the ball rolling on that and maybe see that come out in like a few months.
Okay.
The album is another story. We're at the phase where we have to drop vocals and mix and master. And I did not, as a rookie, I've never done an album before. Didn't know how gut-wrenching it is. Like, it's gut-wrenching. And there were times where I was like, I don't think we should do this.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, I was like, I don't think I can handle this. And it was a good challenge for me, for my personality.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we get a chance to talk a lot about your band. I want to hear a little bit more about that. I mean, I know we're a little bit short on time, but I want to hear more about the band.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, you and Dave been playing together,
So we played in the band a long time ago. Like, it was Dave and I and Richard, my husband, and it was fun. But I was also kind of new at the confidence thing. And so life happened, and we stopped playing together, and I stopped playing completely. And I was never, back then I was not a good drummer. I was decent, I could hold a beat, but I loved playing so much that I didn't care.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the music started calling again. And the question was like, would Richard want to play with us again? You know, and could we rekindle? And so sheepishly, we all got back together one weekend, and when we started playing the first song, I got chills all over my body. I was like, not only did I not forget, you know, where the snare drum is, like, but I could feel again. And it was just so extremely therapeutic. So we kind of ended the jam, and Richard goes, same time next week? And Dave and I were like, hell yeah. And so Dave, my husband, plays bass. And so we make up the rhythm section, which is kind of cool.
That is cool.
And then the second iteration of the band comes around, and our guitarist is like, man, we really could use a keyboard player. And so they were after me, like, text Mike. This is a buddy of ours that, you know, is an amazing player. And I was like, he's not going to want to
play in our band
with us, you know. And they were like, well, you're the nicest one, so he won't be able to turn you down. I was like, I feel downable for sure over here. But anyway, I kept bothering Mike against my better wishes, but against the push of the guys. And finally he was like, hey, I'll come over this weekend. And we were like, you know, we're like little school kids. We're like, you know, and he came over and we played, and it was magic. And I was like, oh, I didn't know like 4 people could make this much sound. And when he left his gear, he left, and we were all like jumping for joy. We were like, he likes us. So now he's, you know, permanent fixture as well. And it's extremely, we all admit that it's a form of therapy for us.
Oh, I can imagine that it is.
Yeah.
That is awesome that you found that and rediscovered that. And now that you've got it, something you share with your husband, that's really cool that y'all get a chance to do that.
Yeah. And it's cool, you know, like, I think because I work on, you know, peace of mind and not, you know, not trying to start shit with people, you know, like trying to be a peaceful entity, you still need to get stuff out physically. So I play I get to hit things with
sticks. Yeah.
And be kind of like, bam, bam, or whatever, and it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very therapeutic on so many levels.
I've not played the drums, but that's something I've always wanted to do. I can only imagine.
I don't think it's too late. Like,
really?
I didn't start playing until I was in my late 20s or early 30s because the band director at our high school wouldn't let girls play the drums.
Don't tell my wife that. She will.
Shame on him.
Yeah, she'll go find that guy.
He's gone.
She'll go find that guy.
He's gone. I mean, not to date myself, but I'm pretty sure he's retired. But I also know at some point somebody's parent was like, that's not cool.
Yeah, that's right.
And they changed it. At least I think they changed it at the high school. But yeah, so.
Crazy how times have changed. Thank
Yep.
God they have. Godly.
Yep.
Well, look, we're right at time, Tara. So give me real quick, where can people find you? Besides the places that I already listed out, I can go back through those again, but what's the easiest place to find you?
Okay. I don't like to be found.
Okay.
No,
Where's
I'm kidding.
the easiest place to connect with the
like
things
that.
you're doing?
Yeah,
There you go.
That's perfect. I'm just messing with you, Neil. I appreciate the plugs too. So obviously the social media things are ways to kind of keep in touch with what we're doing. The website isn't updated very often at this point, but on the website you can find a contact, and the contact is Jane. It's theclinic.jane@gmail.com. And Jane is not our admin anymore, although she's still a rock star with us. Our admin person is Marie.
Okay.
So I usually like to go through her for all the professional stuff for yoga. Because it helps me to kind of keep everything contained. Having all of those social media accounts and me being in charge of them, I was overwhelmed by the DMs and hey, send me your schedule. And I'd be like, yo, I forgot. Like everything goes through Marie now. And I had to do that because I know so many people. So that's really helpful. But if you're just like interested in a story, Instagram's probably what I do the most of. Not your average yoga teacher.
Not your average yoga teacher. Okay, great. Well, look, any final thoughts, anything that you want to leave the audience with, anything that...
I just... I think listen. Like, listen to yourself and be willing to get cues. Like, when your body starts to tell you it's tired, listen to that. Like, I don't know. I think we spend so much time extroverting and interacting and putting out that we forget to pour back into. And I think if we start to listen, we'll start to build a better conversation with the body. I think that'll lead to a lot of happiness, a lot of joy. The book is The Book of Joy.
Book of Joy.
Yeah, that's what I would recommend. It's written by Douglas Abrams.
Okay.
It's a conversation between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who was, I would consider, probably a teacher for me, like a spiritual great, and he's obviously since passed. But man, it goes there. How do we find joy in the midst of suffering? How do we not, like, how do we acknowledge suffering and not, bury it and still find spaces for joy too? Yeah. It's a keeper.
I'm going to have to check that one out.
Yeah.
And part of the reason why Tara's mentioning this, because I've got 2 books here that were part of the yoga, the teacher training, the yoga of discipline, and I'm going to butcher both of their names, but I'll let you kind of chime in. Guru Mayi Shidvilsananda.
Close.
Okay.
Close enough.
And then the other one is Simply Meditate, Happiness Lies Within You, Swami Muktananda.
Yeah.
And these books are books that I've been reading over the last 10 years now. I think it's almost been almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And I come back to them, and there's always nuggets of wisdom. So I'll include that in the show notes. And the other book that she just mentioned is The Book of Joy. So if there's some things that y'all want to delve deeper into, get a little bit better understanding of yoga, meditation, these things, just joy in general, we'll share those in the show notes. But it's been awesome having you. Fantastic.
This is fun.
Yeah, this
Way
is a
too
lot of
much
fun. We got to do it again.
Okay.
We'll set it up again. We'll get deeper into some of these other topics as well.
Talk all the time.
Yeah, let's rock.
Can't stop me. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you being open to this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you again. Until next time, my friends.